Donald Trump has been condemned by many Republicans for his proposal to ban Muslims from entering the United States, but not everyone has joined that growing harsh chorus. Joining me now to talk more about that proposed Muslim travel ban and much, much more, Republican presidential candidate and Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. Senator Paul, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Glad to be with you.
So your fellow Republicans are calling Trump unhinged, saying his proposal is un-American, unconservative. You have been fairly muted in your criticism. What do you make of it all?
Well, I don't think we should have a religious test, but I think there's a danger of obviously generalizing to all Muslims, that that's a bad tendency. But the other tendency may be equally as dangerous. You have Hillary Clinton, who refuses to admit that radical Islam has anything to do with terrorism. So I think you can go too far in generalizing and sort of blaming all Muslims, but you can go too far in saying, you know what, this has nothing to do with a radicalization of a religion.
To play devil's advocate, I think one of the things that Clinton, Obama, and even George W. Bush before them didn't want to do in their refusal to use the term radical Islam is help the terrorists turn this into a war of the West versus Islam. They call them jihadists or whatever, but I think that's why they do that.
And I don't disagree with that, but I would say that part of the way we wage the war also makes a difference. If it's seen to be Americans winning the battle over there, which we can do again, there's never going to be an end to this, because once again, they will see it as a religious war then, because they will perceive it as Christians, Westerners, and Americans, infidels, coming and, crusading in their lands. So that's why I've also been saying to Hillary Clinton and others that the boots on the ground need to be Muslim boots on the ground. And that's not ignoring the religion, it's actually acknowledging that religion is part of this.
Let's talk about the bill that you proposed that I think was voted on last week, which would have imposed a travel ban?
A moratorium until we get an understanding of who's come here and whether they're overstaying their visas.
Specifically from 33 different countries.
Right. And the reason for doing it is we've looked around the world and we say there's some high risk for terrorists to come to our country. Think about it. From 9/11 on, people have used our immigration system to come here to attack us. 19 hijackers on 9/11. They all used our visa system. They didn't obey our rules, though. The students came here, overstayed their visas, didn't go to school. Visitors came, overstayed their visa. So the thing is sure, wouldn't we want to have scrutiny and say, if you say you're coming for a month, that you go back home after a month? And if we don't know that, then I think we do need to press pause and say, let's get a better grip on what's been going on. It's been 15 years, and we have not fixed our immigration system.
But 33 countries is a lot of countries, and I couldn't help but notice that almost all of them are majority Muslim countries. Is this not a way to get around the religious test that Trump is proposing by doing it geographically, even though it's mostly Muslims?
But mine is to try to figure out an answer. So, for example, global entry is kind of like our frequent flyer program internationally. You do a background check. From many of these countries, if we could get them into global entry, if you're a normal businessman or woman who comes here all the time and you have international trade credentials and you're part of the business community, get into global entry and let's get it so it's expedited. But if you're a 25-year-old kid and you have never traveled to America, I think there ought to be extra scrutiny for you coming from these countries.
I have to say, as somebody who follows your legislative work and your speeches very closely, who is a student of the Rand Paul oeuvre, if you will, I was surprised that after Donald Trump's proposal, you weren't out there quoting James Madison, referring to religious liberty, reciting the Bill of Rights. Why such a muted response?
Well, I think some people confuse this. Is having a religious ban against our sensibilities? Yes. So absolutely, I don't think we should have a religious ban. But I think if we go too far the opposite way and say that we're not at risk for people coming here and we're going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars going over there and waging war, where we're not willing to have any rules about who comes into our country. We had 2 Iraqi refugees come to my town, Bowling Green, Kentucky, and they were in the database. One of them had fingerprints on an exploded bomb fragment, and yet we didn't sufficiently screen them. So I think all of us, no matter Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, I think we all could be for a little more scrutiny on who comes to visit.
I want to ask you about the issue of liberty versus security. In testimony today, FBI Director James Comey said terrorists using encrypted communications. This is a big problem, he said. This is what he had to say about that attempted terrorist attack in Garland, Texas, earlier this year. Take a listen.
That morning, before one of those terrorists left to try and commit mass murder, he exchanged 109 messages with an overseas terrorist. We have no idea what he said because those messages were encrypted. And to this day, I can't tell you what he said with that terrorist 109 times the morning of that attack. That is a big problem.
Should telecommunications company give the government access to encrypted communications?
I think banning encryption is a little bit like banning guns. If you ban encryption, the law-abiding people won't use it, and the terrorists will still continue to use it. You have to realize when they open up the source code to people so the government can look into it, it's a weakness in the source code and other people can look. So China can then look and monitor their people. Terrorists can find their way into it. Hackers can. Pirates can. So really it's a weakening of the source code. If you let government in, you're potentially letting a host of other people in.
Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker just said that the size of the Republican field is one of the reasons that Trump has been able to stay in the lead, because so much of the non-Trump voters are divided among a dozen or so candidates. And he said that candidates should follow his lead and drop out. Our latest Iowa poll has you at 3% and 2% in New Hampshire. I think he's talking about you.
Yeah. I think the polls have been so inaccurate that it'd be a mistake to base anything on the polls. In my state of Kentucky, a week before the election, they said the Republican was down 5 points and he won by 8 points, off 13 points in the week before the election. I think, in fact, we've gone too far the other way of really basing election coverage and everything else on polls. We've gone into this Trump mania. I don't think he's going to win. I think really that we've overblown these polls. And in reality, many of the people in these polls are not voters.
I guess we'll see. Senator Rand Paul, thanks for joining us.
You.
And this reminder, we are